My mother-in-law put my military dog outside in a storm. By morning she was in tears. Bryn Mercer was 32, an Army medic from Montana, and still adjusting to life after several deployments overseas. The transition home had not been easy. Loud noises, sleepless nights, and sudden panic attacks followed her long after her service ended. Through all of it, one constant source of comfort remained: Sasha, her retired military dog. Sasha had served beside her and seemed to understand her emotions better than anyone else. Bryn's relationship with her mother-in-law, Darlene Pike, had always been strained. Darlene disliked having animals indoors and often complained about Sasha's fur and muddy paws. More than that, she could not understand why Bryn depended so heavily on a dog for emotional support. Her comments were often dismissive, and she referred to Sasha as nothing more than a pet. Before leaving for a weekend reunion with former Army friends, Bryn reminded her husband, Cole, to keep Sasha inside because severe weather was expected. Unexpectedly, Darlene arrived to stay at the house while Bryn was away. At the reunion, Bryn tried to enjoy reconnecting with old friends, but she felt uneasy. She was accustomed to Sasha's calming presence and found it difficult to relax without her. As the evening progressed, a powerful storm moved across the state. Bryn sent several messages home and received only brief replies from Cole. Then a text from Darlene appeared: "Your dog is finally where she belongs tonight." Alarmed, Bryn tried calling home. Eventually, Darlene answered and casually mentioned that Sasha had been left outside. Panic set in immediately. Bryn left the reunion and drove through the storm, fearing the worst. Back at home, Darlene had decided to put Sasha on the covered porch while Cole was at work. As the storm intensified, heavy rain and strong winds battered the house. Sasha remained outside, frightened but relying on her training and instincts. She moved toward a narrow corner near a brick wall just before a large tree crashed onto the porch, destroying the area where she had originally been chained. By sunrise, Bryn reached home and found the yard covered in debris. She called for Sasha and finally heard a weak bark. The dog was trembling but alive. Bryn knelt beside her and cried with relief. When Darlene saw the damage, she realized how close Sasha had come to dying because of her decision. Bryn calmly explained that Sasha had once protected soldiers and later helped her survive some of the darkest moments of her life. Darlene broke down in tears and admitted she had never understood the bond they shared. Cole asked his mother to leave, and later she sent a letter accepting responsibility for her actions. Bryn did not forgive her immediately. Instead, she focused on Sasha's recovery and appreciated the loyal companion who had never left her side. Darlene Pike had disliked Sasha from the very first day she stepped into Bryn and Cole's house. It started with small comments. "She sheds too much. She drools on the floor. Why does she keep following you around?" At first, Bryn ignored the remarks. She knew not everyone loved dogs. But over time she realized Darlene's problem wasn't with dogs in general. It was with Sasha and the place she held in Bryn's life. To Darlene, Sasha was just an animal. To Bryn, Sasha was family. The retired military dog had served beside her overseas. She had been there during terrifying nights, after long medical evacuations, and through moments that left emotional scars Bryn still carried. When Bryn returned home from the army, the transition to civilian life had been harder than she ever admitted. Crowded places made her anxious. Sudden noises startled her. Some nights she woke from nightmares and couldn't go back to sleep. Sasha somehow always knew. She would quietly walk over and rest her head on Bryn's lap or lie beside her bed until she calmed down. Even Cole didn't understand Bryn the way Sasha did. One afternoon, about a week before the reunion, Bryn experienced a panic attack after hearing loud fireworks in the neighborhood. She was sitting on the kitchen floor trying to steady her breathing, when Sasha immediately came over and gently placed her head in Bryn's lap. Darlene happened to be visiting. Instead of showing concern, she folded her arms. "This isn't healthy," she said. Bryn looked up at her. "What isn't?" "This dependence on the dog. You're 32 years old. You shouldn't need an animal to calm you down." The words stung. Bryn slowly stood and looked directly at her mother-in-law. "You weren't there," she said quietly. Darlene frowned. "There where?" "Overseas. During the nights I couldn't sleep. During the days I lost people. During the moments I wasn't sure I was coming home." For a brief second the room became silent. Sasha was there. Darlene looked uncomfortable, but her expression quickly hardened. "It's still just a dog." Those 4 words stayed with Bryn long after the conversation ended. Just a dog. As if years of service meant nothing. As if loyalty could be dismissed so easily. As if the bond they shared wasn't real. A few days later, Bryn began packing for her weekend reunion with old army friends. Weather reports warned that a major storm system was moving into the area. As she packed her suitcase, Sasha followed her from room to room. When Bryn walked into the bedroom, Sasha followed. When she went to the kitchen, Sasha followed. When she sat on the couch, Sasha lay beside her feet. The dog seemed unusually anxious. Finally, Bryn knelt beside her and rubbed behind her ears. "I'll be back soon, girl," she said softly. Sasha pressed her nose into Bryn's hand and let out a quiet whine. At that moment, Darlene walked into the room carrying a cup of coffee. She watched the interaction and shook her head. "That dog acts like the world is ending every time you leave." Bryn smiled. "Maybe she just loves me." Darlene rolled her eyes. She didn't see loyalty. She didn't see a service animal. She didn't see a companion who had helped an army medic survive some of the darkest days of her life. She saw fur on furniture, muddy paws, and an attachment she didn't understand. As Bryn finished packing, she had no idea that Darlene's resentment had been quietly growing for months. And before the weekend was over, that resentment would put Sasha in terrible danger. Bryn Mercer had looked forward to the reunion for months. It was the first time in nearly 3 years that several members of her old Army medical unit would be together in one place. They had served overseas, shared impossible days, and carried memories that no one else could fully understand. Cole encouraged her to go. "You need this," he had told her. "You deserve a weekend with people who get what you've been through." Bryn agreed, but leaving home wasn't easy. Before getting into her truck, she knelt beside Sasha one more time. The retired military dog seemed unusually uneasy. Instead of returning to her bed after their goodbye, she remained pressed against Bryn's legs. Bryn smiled and rubbed her ears. "I'll be back before you know it." Sasha let out a soft whine. Even after Bryn climbed into the truck, the dog sat near the front window watching her leave. The image stayed in Bryn's mind during the entire drive. The reunion was held at a lakeside lodge about 3 hours away. By the time she arrived, several former unit members were already there. The atmosphere was warm and familiar. They laughed about old memories, shared stories about civilian life, and spent hours catching up. For a little while, Bryn relaxed. She smiled more than she had in months. But every now and then, she found herself reaching toward her side as if Sasha were still beside her. The absence felt strange. That evening, they all gathered around a fireplace inside the lodge. One of her former teammates, Mason Reed, noticed her distraction. "You okay?" he asked. Bryn nodded. "Just thinking about home." "The dog," he guessed. She smiled. "The dog." Mason laughed softly. "That animal practically adopted the whole unit." Bryn's expression softened. Sasha had done more than that. She had become a source of comfort for everyone during difficult deployments. Soldiers often sat with her after hard days because she had a way of calming people without making them explain anything. As the evening continued, rain began tapping against the windows. Someone turned on the television. The weather report interrupted the program. A severe storm warning had been issued for several counties, including the one where Bryn lived. Powerful winds. Heavy rain. Possible falling trees. Bryn immediately reached for her phone. She sent a message to Cole. "Everything okay there?" A few minutes later he replied. "Everything's fine. Don't worry." She looked at the dark clouds outside. Something still didn't feel right. Half an hour later she sent another message. "How's Sasha?" Several minutes passed. Then a reply appeared. "He's okay." The answer seemed unusually short. Bryn frowned. Normally, Cole would send a picture of Sasha sleeping on the couch or say something funny about her. This time there was nothing. The storm outside became louder. Rain hammered against the lodge windows. Wind rattled the glass. Then her phone buzzed again. This message wasn't from Cole. It was from Darlene. "Your dog is finally where she belongs tonight." Bryn stared at the screen. Her stomach tightened. The message made no sense. Where she belongs. She immediately called home. No answer. She called again. Nothing. A third time. Still nothing. She looked at the storm outside and suddenly couldn't sit still anymore. A terrible feeling settled in her chest. Then her phone rang. It was Darlene. Bryn answered immediately. Where's Sasha? There was a short pause. Then Darlene casually replied. Oh, she's outside on the porch. I couldn't keep that dirty animal in the house all evening. For several seconds Bryn couldn't speak. Outside. In the storm. Her heart began pounding. And at that moment she knew her weekend reunion was over. The rain had started long before sunset. Darlene stood in the living room and watched water run down the windows. The weather forecast repeated warnings about strong winds and possible damage. She lowered the volume and looked toward the hallway. Sasha was lying near the front door. The dog had barely moved since Bryn left. Every few minutes she lifted her head and listened, as if waiting for a familiar vehicle to pull into the driveway. Darlene sighed. She had spent the entire afternoon annoyed by the dog. Sasha had followed her into the kitchen, then into the laundry room and later settled outside the guest bedroom door. To Darlene it felt like the animal was watching her. When she walked back into the living room she noticed muddy paw prints near the back entrance. That was enough. She grabbed a towel and wiped the floor with sharp, angry movements. This is ridiculous, she muttered. She looked at Sasha again. The dog simply stared back at her. Darlene suddenly made a decision. She walked to the coat closet and pulled out an old chain that had once belonged to a previous pet. Sasha stood when she saw it. Her ears lowered. She took a few steps backward. You're spending the night outside, Darlene said. The dog remained where she was. Darlene reached for her collar. Sasha didn't growl or snap. She simply resisted by refusing to move. That only irritated Darlene more. After several attempts she managed to clip the chain onto the collar and lead the dog toward the front door. The moment the door opened, cold wind rushed into the house. Rain sprayed across the entrance. Sasha stopped immediately. She would not step forward. Darlene pulled harder. The dog looked back into the house. For a brief second something about that look made Darlene hesitate. The animal seemed frightened. Not stubborn. Not aggressive. Frightened. But the moment passed. He tugged the chain again. Finally, Sasha stepped onto the covered porch. The door shut behind her. The sound echoed through the house. A few seconds later, scratching came from outside. Then another scratch. Then a soft whine. Darlene turned up the television. A flash of lightning illuminated the room. The scratching continued. She increased the volume again. An hour passed. Then another. The storm grew worse. Wind pushed against the walls of the house. Rain blew sideways. Several times Darlene looked toward the front door. She considered letting the dog back inside. Then she remembered all the arguments about fur, muddy floors, and what she considered an unhealthy attachment. She convinced herself the dog would be fine. Animals stayed outside all the time. Another loud crack of thunder shook the windows. The lights flickered. Then came a sound she couldn't identify. A sharp noise from somewhere in the yard. She froze. A few seconds later, another loud creak echoed outside. Branches scraped against the roof. The house suddenly felt very quiet. Darlene looked toward the front door again. She almost stood up. Almost. Instead she remained in her chair. Outside the storm continued. Minutes later, a violent crashing sound exploded through the darkness. The entire house shook. Darlene jumped to her feet. Her heart pounded. Something large had fallen. She hurried to the window but rain and darkness made it impossible to see. The porch light had gone out. Everything beyond the glass was black. For the first time that night one thought entered her mind. She listened carefully. No scratching. No whining. Nothing at all. And as the storm raged outside, Darlene slowly stepped away from the window, suddenly afraid of what morning might reveal. Several miles away, laughter filled the lodge, but Bryn could no longer hear any of it. She stood near the window with her phone in her hand, staring at the sheets of rain outside. The call with Darlene had ended only minutes earlier, yet her pulse still raced. Mason walked over and noticed her expression. What happened? Bryn swallowed hard. Something's wrong at home. He immediately stopped smiling. Do you need to go? She didn't answer right away. She looked at the parking lot where rain pounded the cars and bent the trees along the lake. A memory suddenly surfaced. Years earlier, during a deployment, she had ignored a bad feeling because she thought she was overreacting. By the end of that day, 2 soldiers had been injured. Since then, she had learned something about herself. When a feeling like this appeared, she paid attention. She looked at Mason. I'm leaving. He nodded without asking another question. Within minutes she was gathering her things. A few of her old unit members offered to wait until the storm passed, but she couldn't sit still. Every minute felt too long. As she walked outside, cold rain hit her face. The wind nearly pulled the door from her hand. She climbed into her truck and started the engine. Before driving away she called Cole. This time he answered. Bring. Why is Sasha outside? Silence. A long, uncomfortable silence. Then he sighed. I didn't know Mom put her out there. She gripped the steering wheel. What do you mean you didn't know? I had to cover an evening shift. I left before dinner. You left your mother alone at the house? Bryn, I didn't think. No, you didn't. Another silence followed. She heard regret in his voice. I'm driving home, she said. In this weather? Yes. Please be careful. She ended the call. The highway was almost empty. Rain hammered the windshield so hard that the wiper struggled to keep up. Every flash of lightning revealed trees bending in the wind. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel. He kept thinking about Sasha. The dog hated storms. Not because she was timid, but because certain sounds reminded her of places neither of them liked remembering. They had spent years learning to calm each other during frightening nights. Now Sasha was alone. The thought made Bryn's chest ache. A mile later, traffic slowed completely. Red brake lights stretched ahead of her. A large branch had fallen across one lane. Emergency workers were already directing cars around it. She looked at the clock. Every delay felt unbearable. As she waited, she remembered the last thing she had seen before leaving home. Sasha sitting by the window. Watching. Waiting. As if she somehow knew something was wrong. The line of vehicles finally moved. Bryn pressed forward. The storm showed no signs of stopping. She checked her phone again. No messages. No calls. Nothing. The silence made everything worse. By the time she reached the county road leading toward home, it was after midnight. The wind remained fierce. Debris littered the pavement. She turned onto her street and saw several houses without electricity. Darkness covered the neighborhood. Then she noticed something else. A large shape across the sky where her porch light should have been. At first she couldn't understand what she was seeing. Then lightning flashed. And for one brief second she saw the outline of a massive tree lying across the front of her house. Her heart stopped. She pressed harder on the gas pedal. And for the first time in years, the army medic who had stayed calm during emergencies felt completely helpless. The truck barely came to a stop before Bryn jumped out. The rain had weakened to a drizzle, but the air still smelled of wet wood and broken branches. Pieces of leaves covered the yard. One section of the fence had collapsed and the front steps were hidden beneath debris. She didn't even close the truck door. Sasha, she shouted. There was no answer. She hurried toward the house, slipping on the soaked grass. Sasha. Nothing. A light turned on inside. The front door opened. Darlene appeared wearing a robe. Her face was pale. Bryn. Where is she? Bryn demanded. I don't know. Those 3 words sent a chill through her. She stepped past Darlene and climbed over a large branch lying across the walkway. The front of the house looked worse up close. Splintered wood and pieces of roofing covered the porch. Her breathing became uneven. She looked everywhere she could. Near the steps. Under the broken railing. Beside the bushes. There was no sign of Sasha. Darlene stood several feet away, wringing her hands. I couldn't see anything after the power went out, she said quietly. Bryn didn't answer. He kept searching. Then she heard it. A faint sound. So soft she almost thought she imagined it. A small whimper. She froze. The sound came again. This time she knew exactly where it had come from. Near the side of the porch. She dropped to her knees and pushed aside several smaller branches. Sasha. A weak bark answered. Relief hit her so suddenly that tears filled her eyes. She moved another piece of debris. Then she saw a familiar nose. A pair of tired eyes looked up at her. Sasha was alive. The dog slowly crawled forward from a narrow space beside the brick wall. Her fur was soaked. She was trembling so badly she could barely stand. Bryn gathered her into her arms. For several seconds she couldn't speak. She simply held her. Sasha pressed her face against Bryn's chest and released a small, exhausted sound. It's okay, Bryn whispered. I'm here. She felt the dog's body shaking. She also felt something else. The blanket. It was wrapped partly around Sasha's legs. Bryn frowned. The blanket had been inside the house before she left. She looked around the small space where the dog had sheltered. The spot was untouched. Not a single large branch had fallen there. Then she looked at the rest of the porch. The destruction was everywhere else. She slowly stood, still holding Sasha. At that moment, Cole's truck pulled into the driveway. He got out and stopped cold when he saw the damage. Then he saw Sasha in Bryn's arms. Oh my God. He hurried toward them. What happened? Bryn couldn't answer. She was still trying to understand how close she had come to losing the dog. Cole looked at his mother. Darlene began crying. I didn't know it would get this bad. He stared at her. You put her outside? She covered her mouth with her hand. I thought she'd be fine. The words hung in the cold morning air. Bryn finally looked at her. She wasn't angry in that moment. She was devastated. Because one careless decision had nearly ended the life of the creature that had stood beside her through some of the hardest years she had ever known. Sasha lifted her head and looked at Bryn. Then, despite everything she had been through during the night, she gently licked the tears from Bryn's cheek. And that simple act broke her heart all over again. Bryn carried Sasha inside and laid her gently on a pile of blankets near the fireplace. The house was still cold from the power outage. She found a flashlight, wrapped another blanket around the dog and sat beside her on the floor. Sasha looked exhausted. Her eyes kept closing and opening. Bryn carefully checked her paws, legs and ribs. She ran her hands through the wet fur looking for injuries. Then she found a scrape along one shoulder and a small cut near one ear. Nothing appeared broken. She released a shaky breath. Cole knelt beside her. Should we go to an emergency vet? Bryn nodded immediately. I want her checked. Darlene remained near the doorway. She looked like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. For the first time since Bryn had known her, the woman looked genuinely shaken. Bryn stood and went to change into dry clothes. When she entered her bedroom, she noticed something on the nightstand. Sasha's favorite toy. The old fabric rabbit she carried around the house. Bryn frowned. The toy should have been in the living room. Then she remembered the blanket wrapped around Sasha. Slowly she walked back to the fireplace. She looked at the dog. Then at Cole. Did you put that blanket outside? He shook his head. No. The toy. No. Bryn looked at Darlene. She looked confused. I didn't take anything out there. Silence filled the room. Bryn sat down again. That meant Sasha had somehow gotten both items herself. She remembered the narrow shelter beside the brick wall. The blanket had covered part of the dog's body. The toy had somehow remained dry. It looked as if Sasha had made herself a small, safe place during the storm. The thought made Bryn emotional. Even alone and frightened, the dog had held on to the things that comforted her. Almost the same way Bryn herself did after difficult memories from her army days. She reached out and gently stroked Sasha's head. The dog sighed softly and leaned against her hand. Darlene suddenly sat down in a nearby chair. Her eyes never left Sasha. After several long moments she quietly asked, Did she really work with you overseas? Bryn looked up. Yes. What did she do? The question surprised her. It was the first time Darlene had ever shown interest. Bryn was silent for a few seconds. Then she answered. She helped keep people safe. Darlene swallowed. And afterward? Bryn looked at Sasha. Afterward she helped me. The room became quiet again. Outside, the sky was finally beginning to clear. A little sunlight slipped through the windows. Darlene stared at the dog for a long time. Then she looked toward the damaged porch. Her eyes filled with tears. If that tree had fallen a little differently. She couldn't finish the sentence. Nobody needed her to. They all knew. She covered her face with her hands. I left her out there. Bryn said nothing. I left her alone. Her voice broke. I did that. The guilt in her words was unmistakable. Cole sat down slowly. He looked at his mother and then at Sasha. The house was silent except for the sound of the fireplace crackling. Finally, Darlene lowered her hands. She looked directly at Bryn. I don't think I've ever been this ashamed of myself. Bryn didn't answer. She simply sat beside her dog and kept one hand on Sasha's side, feeling each slow breath. Because at that moment one thing mattered more than anger. Sasha was alive. And after everything that had happened during the night, that felt like a miracle. A few hours later, the power returned. Bryn drove Sasha to the veterinarian's office as soon as it opened. Cole came with her. Darlene stayed behind, saying she would clean up the mess outside. The drive was quiet. Sasha rested her head on Bryn's leg the entire way. Every few minutes, Bryn looked down just to make sure she was still comfortable. At the clinic, the veterinarian performed a full examination. Aside from dehydration, exhaustion, and a few minor injuries, Sasha was going to recover. The words felt like a weight lifting from Bryn's shoulders. She thanked the veterinarian more than once. As they walked back to the truck, Cole finally spoke. "I don't know how to fix this." Bryn looked ahead. "You can't." He looked at her. "You don't think Mom is sorry?" "I think she's horrified." "That's different." Bryn took a long breath. "Being sorry doesn't erase what happened." Cole had no answer. When they reached home, they found Darlene in the front yard. She had spent the morning gathering broken branches and pieces of wood into piles. Her hands were dirty and her clothes were damp. She looked exhausted. The moment she saw Sasha step out of the truck, tears appeared in her eyes. She slowly walked forward. Then she stopped a few feet away. She didn't try to touch the dog. She didn't even move closer. Instead, she looked directly at Bryn. "I called the insurance company." Bryn said nothing. "I also called someone to remove the fallen tree." Still nothing. Darlene looked down at her hands. Then she quietly said, "I know none of that changes anything." The yard became silent. A bird landed on the damaged fence and then flew away. Finally, Darlene lifted her eyes again. "When I couldn't hear her this morning, I thought she had died." Her voice cracked. "I've never been so afraid." Bryn watched her carefully. "I kept thinking about her sitting out there by herself." A tear rolled down Darlene's cheek. "And I put her there." Cole looked away. Darlene took another shaky breath. "I don't know why I hated that dog so much." The words seemed to surprise even her. "I think." She paused. "I think I was jealous." Bryn frowned. "Jealous?" She nodded. "I watched the way you looked at her. The way she always knew when you were upset. The way you trusted her." She wiped her eyes. "I couldn't understand why a dog seemed to reach you in ways people couldn't." The confession hung in the air. Then she looked at Sasha. "I kept thinking if she wasn't around, maybe you'd stop depending on her." Bryn felt her chest tighten. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "You never understood that she wasn't replacing people." Darlene looked at her. "Then what was she doing?" Bryn glanced down at Sasha. "She was helping me carry things I couldn't carry alone." No one spoke. Darlene's face crumpled. For the first time, she seemed to understand the depth of the bond she had spent months mocking. She looked at Sasha again. The dog simply stood beside Bryn, calm and quiet. Then, slowly, Darlene lowered herself into one of the porch chairs that had survived the storm. She covered her face with both hands. And there in the middle of the damaged yard, surrounded by broken branches and pieces of shattered wood, she began to cry harder than anyone had ever seen her cry. Darlene remained in the yard for a long time. Nobody tried to comfort her. Bryn simply stood beside Sasha, watching the woman cry. Eventually, Darlene wiped her face and slowly stood. "I'll leave," she said quietly. Cole looked at his mother but didn't answer. She nodded as if she already expected the silence. Then she walked into the house. Bryn followed a few minutes later. She found Darlene in the guest room, folding clothes into a small suitcase. The older woman looked tired, much older than she had the day before. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Then Darlene stopped packing. "I owe you an apology." Bryn remained by the doorway. "I know words won't fix anything," Darlene said. "But you deserve one anyway." She sat on the edge of the bed. "When you married my son, I thought I was losing him. Then I saw how close you were to that dog and I convinced myself there wasn't room for me anymore." Bryn listened without interrupting. "I know it sounds foolish." "It sounds lonely," Bryn answered. Darlene looked surprised. A tear slipped down her cheek. "It was lonely." The room became quiet again. Bryn crossed her arms. "You could have talked to me." "I know." "You could have told me you felt left out." "I know." "You could have tried to understand." Darlene lowered her eyes. "I know." Bryn looked toward the window. She thought about the long drive home, the destroyed porch, and the fear she had felt when she couldn't find Sasha. She could still feel it. That fear wasn't gone. It probably wouldn't disappear for a long time. Finally, she looked back at her mother-in-law. You didn't just hurt me. Darlene's eyes filled again. You hurt something innocent. She nodded. I know. And if I had come home a little later. Bryn couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Darlene understood. She covered her mouth with her hand. I'm so sorry. Bryn believed she meant it. But that didn't change the truth. Trust had been broken. After a long silence, Bryn spoke again. I can't pretend this never happened. I wouldn't ask you to. I don't trust you around Sasha. Darlene nodded slowly. I understand. I don't trust you in my house right now either. The words seemed painful to hear, but Darlene accepted them. I understand that too. At that moment, Cole entered the room. He looked from his mother to his wife. Then he spoke softly. I think it's best if Mom stays with Aunt Linda for a while. Darlene didn't argue. She simply zipped her suitcase. A few minutes later, she carried it to the front door. Sasha remained beside Bryn. As Darlene reached for the handle, she turned around one last time. She looked directly at the dog. I'm sorry, she whispered. Sasha quietly watched her. Then Darlene looked at Bryn. I hope someday you can remember me for more than this. Bryn didn't know if that would ever happen. She couldn't make promises she wasn't sure she could keep. So she answered honestly. Right now I need time. Darlene nodded. For the first time in years, she didn't argue, defend herself, or make excuses. She simply opened the door and walked outside. Bryn watched from the living room window as her mother-in-law got into her car and drove away. The driveway became empty. The house became silent. Then Sasha rested her head against Bryn's leg. Bryn looked down and placed her hand gently on the dog's neck. Some wounds didn't leave scars you could see. And some betrayals took much longer than a storm to heal. The next few weeks passed slowly. The damaged porch was repaired, the fallen tree was removed, and life gradually settled into a quieter routine. Summer sunlight replaced the dark clouds that had hung over the house that night. Sasha recovered a little more each day. Her energy returned. She started following Bryn around the kitchen again and resumed her favorite habit of sleeping near the living room window. Seeing those small things brought Bryn an unexpected sense of peace. One afternoon she found an envelope in the mailbox. The handwriting on the front was familiar. Darlene. Bryn carried it inside and placed it on the table. She stared at it for several minutes before opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter. There were no excuses. No attempts to defend her actions. No requests for forgiveness. Darlene wrote that she had spent many sleepless nights thinking about what happened. She admitted she had judged something she did not understand and had allowed her pride to turn into cruelty. She wrote that she had been wrong about Sasha and wrong about Bryn. At the bottom of the page was one final sentence. Thank you for loving my son and for fighting so hard for the things you love. Bryn read the letter twice. Then she folded it and placed it back in the envelope. She didn't throw it away. She also didn't call Darlene. She simply set it aside. That evening, she sat on the rebuilt porch with a cup of coffee while Sasha lay beside her. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. The air was calm. For the first time in weeks, everything felt still. Cole stepped outside and sat beside her. You've been quiet. Bryn smiled slightly. I've been thinking. About Mom. She nodded. He looked toward the yard. I know she hurt you. Bryn looked at Sasha. She did. Do you think you'll ever forgive her? The question hung between them. Finally, Bryn answered. I think forgiveness and trust are different things. Cole listened. I might forgive her someday. But trust has to be rebuilt. That doesn't happen because someone says they're sorry. He slowly nodded. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Sasha lifted her head and looked at Bryn. Her tail tapped gently against the porch boards. Bryn laughed softly and scratched behind her ears. You know, she said, I spent years believing I had to carry everything by myself. Cole looked at her. And then, he looked at the dog. Then this stubborn old girl came into my life. Sasha rested her head on Bryn's knee. A warm breeze moved through the yard. Bryn thought about all the places she had been, all the things she had seen, and all the people who had come and gone from her life. Through all of it, one thing had remained constant. Loyalty. Not loud loyalty. Not perfect loyalty. Just quiet, steady presence. The kind that stays beside you during your worst moments. She placed both hands on Sasha's head and looked out at the fading sunlight. That storm had almost taken away something precious. Instead, it had revealed something important. Love is not measured by words or grand promises. Sometimes love looks like a dog waiting by a window. Sometimes it looks like a hand resting on warm fur after a difficult night. And sometimes surviving together becomes its own kind of victory. As darkness slowly settled over the yard, Bryn sat beside Sasha and realized that after everything they had endured, being there together was more than enough.